And I've tried to have an environment of trust to where they feel like they can tell me things too. And there's actually today, my director of advancement, she shared with me, she said, "Hey, would you mind if I give you some constructive feedback?" And I was like, "Sure, go for it." And she had some really good feedback about a meeting that we had the day before with a couple. And after she shared it, I was like, "Gosh, you are totally right." You know, I'm really gonna try to do better on that next time.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm so excited about our guest today. Today I'm going to be speaking with Jason Rachels. Jason is the president of Calvary Christian Academy in the United States. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you about your story. We've talked a bit offline in different contexts over time. And I really have a lot of respect for what you do there and how you've grown the school. For our listeners, can you unpack a little bit more about your role there and anything else you want to share about who Jason is?
Sure. So as far as the role there, so yeah, I get to serve as president, and we're blessed to have 4 campuses in 4 different cities in South Florida. And with that, I get to think in terms of direction, where we're heading, and get to lead a great leadership team that helps make it happen on all those different campuses. As far as for who I am, I'll share a little bit about my family. I'm been married to Jennifer for, let's see here, 31 years now, 32, almost 32 years. Getting close to 32. We're real close
Yeah,
to
wow.
32. And I have a 24-year-old Willow and 21-year-old Maya and 12-year-old Remy. So all girls and me. And been living here in South Florida for a good number of years, but originally grew up in Georgia, which is the state just to the north of Florida. So, and been a believer since I was 12 years old.
Yeah, that's awesome, and thanks for sharing about you and your family. Nearly 32 years of marriage. I need some advice on the children's side. You've got a 24-year-old. I've got a 2.5-year-old. So that's that's I don't know if you can even remember that stage now, or if there's a part of parents that kind of blocks out that the 2-year chasing 2-year-olds around stage of life. But yeah, that's where I am. That's so awesome. So let's chatting about your leadership story. I always like to start by asking about a moment for you, and really whatever comes to mind is great. When you were a child or when you were a teenager, as you think back, do you recall a time or one of the times where you first realized, hey, maybe I can be a leader, or maybe I am a leader? What comes to mind?
Yeah, good question. One that comes to mind is actually in high school. Started as a public high school, so not a Christian school, but a public high school, and started leading a Bible study at lunch. That other kids would come and be a part of, and so that might have been where I saw that I could lead and get something going that wasn't there before, and other people found value in that. So that's probably the thing that comes to mind as you ask that question.
Yeah, that's a good answer, because that takes a lot of courage, and obviously it's setting yourself apart a little bit from in a public school. When you did that, did you have what part of starting that Bible study came really naturally to you? Was there any part of that kind of leadership where you went, wow, there's real ease to this for Jason? And was there any part of it where you were like, oh man, this is challenging for me with my personality style, or with how how I'm wired?
Yeah, no, good question. I think one thing for me is I'm sort of naturally collaborative, and so I don't try to make it all about me. So it felt pretty easy and comfortable because it was really just talking to some of my friends who I thought might enjoy being a part of it, and we would even take turns of who's going to lead today and things like that. So wasn't the Jason show, but could just be like, hey, let's get together and let's all sort of make this happen. And so that took any kind of pressure off, and everybody, since everybody would take turns leading, they knew what it was like to do that. And it was, small group and more conversational. So seemed to flow pretty well. But even to today, I think that's what I find is that I enjoy the most is more getting people together and trying to get all the good out of the room versus just me presenting something amazing.
Yeah, I think that is a natural strength, that collaborative approach, if that comes really naturally to you. In your journey as a leader so far, though, have you found that there have been times when you've had to, I guess the other side of that, which is the more I'm just going to make the call. In your journey as a leader, have you found that there are moments where you have to kind of lean into that and actually step out and be decisive, or have you found that being collaborative usually works in most situations?
Yeah, yeah, I think it. I think it works in most situations, and yet, to your point, as the leader, when you are the president of the school or whatever somebody's role might be, um, you still are the one responsible to make the final call. And while the Bible says there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors, but one thing that you'll find also is that even though there's wisdom, there's not necessarily unity in the multitude of counselors, and so you still are oftentimes getting some good points on both sides of the argument, if you will. In the end, as a leader, you will still have to choose to say, okay, well, in light of the competing tensions, this is what we're going to do, and but I like to try to get that wisdom from others, but then when needed, I'm ready to make the final call and move forward and take responsibility for that, whatever may come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a tension that is particularly for leaders who are listening, who are similarly wired to you, where they're more collaborative. I think there are often those moments where you realize, actually, I need to make a call here, whereas naturally I want to continue hearing from the room, but there's that learning to actually pick those moments where you've heard the wisdom, and then you still have to be as Patrick Lencioni calls it, the tiebreaker. Um, which I really like that idea of hearing the wisdom in the room, but knowing that you're not necessarily going to find unity from the room. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So going back to your story, tell us a bit about you. Grew up in Georgia, and then what was your kind of leadership journey coming out of school and university to end up in education?
Yeah, yes, I never planned on being in education. Um, I have probably one of the oddest majors, majors from universities I can think of. I have a double major in Greek and sociology with a minor in Latin. So rather obscure, and didn't have a lot of employers, hungry to grab that particular degree set. But that was okay. While in college, I served in like a youth pastor role part time at a church, and so I found that I really did enjoy that. And so when I graduated, I found an interim youth pastor role, did that for a while, and then in that interim position, the pastor asked me, would you like to be considered for the permanent role? And I said, you know what, I think while it's been good and I've enjoyed it, I think I'm actually drawn to more of a school type environment. And so something like a Bible teacher, to where, it's not about having to do uh, lock-ins and parties and volleyball games as much as let's just dig into the Bible, let's study it in more of an academic setting. And so I began to work towards a degree that I could do that in. And then I got a job as a Bible teacher. And then after 5 years of teaching Bible, I had the opportunity to step into a role as an assistant principal. And that was my first administrative role that then led to elementary principal, later high school principal, and then later president of the school.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's an interesting path, and that's what's interesting about that is that that's kind of my background as well. Is that I've been at my church, Gateway Baptist Church here in Australia, in Brisbane. I've been there
Yeah.
since I was one, which is
Wow.
yeah, which is really cool. Um, and I had a season there which was really pivotal in my leadership journey, where I was the youth pastor at our Mackenzie campus, and I learnt so much in that. That was really the time where I'd had other kind of leadership opportunities, but I'd never really had a group of people that I had to really cast vision for, particularly volunteers, and that
Yeah.
shaped me so much. That was my first time where I realized, wait a second, when I'm at a whiteboard, or where I'm sitting down with someone and trying to, help them to really work out how to best lead in one of the parts of our youth ministry, with 300 teenagers. So it was a pretty large youth ministry.
Yeah, it's
And
very big.
yeah, that was when I realized, wait a second, I love being at this whiteboard. I love coaching my volunteers, and so that was where I really got my um, a lot of the first opportunities to do what I do now with clarity, which is working with particularly school leaders, but it was in that youth pastor context. So, what were the biggest learnings you had as a youth pastor? Because it sounds like you were a pretty young guy at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I really learned. It's funny looking back on it now. I can't believe they trusted me with kids, because I just was so. Now sitting in this position, I can see all the deficiencies I had of poor planning and poor leading of the volunteers and others. And I wish I could go back now. I could do a lot better job. Um, but yeah, I think I began to learn, wow, you need to plan further ahead. I remember just a little, horror story. I had set up this whole trip to where we were going to be camping, and but I had not reserved the space far enough in advance, but didn't even really cross my mind enough to where it was like when we got closer to the event, we came to find out this event that people have already paid for, signed up for, and are planning on, we can't even go there. So we had to, scramble, find another place that we could go, and all these kinds of chaos and things because I was just so green as a leader and hadn't really had anybody, pouring into me and coaching me or training me in it. So I was just bumbling my way through it and sort of learning. Okay, I need to plan further ahead next time, or I need to be more clear with volunteers or things like that. So it was definitely a trial by fire learning experience.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a that's a great story. Realizing, I think, yeah, everyone's got those kind of stories where you it sticks with you for life. You never never organize an event without confirming the spot again. I'm sure after that. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so then after your time there, and then you were doing Bible teaching for 5 years, and then stepped into that assistant principal role, and continued on to now be through different roles to be president. Um, so across your leadership journey so far, are there any aha moments that pop into your mind that's maybe similarly to the forgetting or not planning to organize the location, but as a youth pastor, but any moments that pop into your head where you think, that was when I really learnt a lesson, either from a positive, from seeing, oh, that worked so well, or as well going, okay, now that's how that works. Now that I've done that and I've learned, I'll never do that again. Anything that pops into your head?
yeah. A couple of different things probably jump into my head there. Again, uh, the same way. Trial by you make the mistake, and then you realize, oh, that really wasn't the way to do that. One was when I was an elementary principal, uh, letting a teacher go probably too quickly. Oftentimes people can let people go too slowly, but in this case, in looking back on it, I realized, I don't think I really gave him, an opportunity to get some clear redirection and a chance to show that he could do something different. Um, and yet in my mind, I thought, okay, well, gosh, we're having these negative reports. Would I want my child to have him next year based on that? No. Well, if I wouldn't want my child to have him based on that, then why would I send other kids, to him. So it seemed like it seemed fair and appropriate at the time. But as I look back now, I'm like, you know what? It's true that we definitely have to, make those decisions when we need to. And I've definitely let many people go through the years and try to do it, at the right pace. But we definitely need to also be clear with people and show them, hey, this is where you're failing. This is what we instead need to see. Here's some guidance and direction. How can I help you to, show us that, better, better path, better, performance. And so just trying to now make sure that I time it right and am very clear and giving people a chance to show, if they can change. And sometimes they can, and that's awesome, fun success stories for everybody. And then when they can't, at least I know and they know that they've been given a fair opportunity with a lot of clarity, and direction. So that's one. And another is it's sort of along the lines of, if you've read the book 1 Minute Manager, I realized that I was sort of storing things in my head, so an employee would do something wrong and it would be like, okay, I don't like that, but I don't feel like it was big enough to where I need to go and talk to them about it, And then 2 months later, they do something similar. I store it again. And then 3 months later, they do it again. But then I sit down with them and I'm like, hey, 3 months ago you did this, 5 months ago you did that. And they're like, whoa, you've been storing this negative stuff against me. Why didn't you talk to me? And how it's so much better instead to, more immediately address things so that, you nip it in the bud, and people also begin to have greater trust as they realize, oh, if Jason has an issue, he lets you know about it. You don't have to worry that he's, carrying something, keeping a bad list of, what you've done. So really trying to just be very upfront, brief, to the point, address things. And then you tend to have people not repeating them, whereas if you just store it, they're very likely to do it again because you didn't even let them know that it's something you don't like.
Yeah, I love that. I think the pushback I often hear from people around that kind of leadership is that they're worried that if they tell people, when they see something, that people will feel like they're being micromanaged, or that they just keep peppering them with negative things. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think so much of it's just in the style and the way it's done, that if you are sharing the thing in a clear, brief way, not harping on it, but just like, hey, John, the way you spoke to Sarah in that meeting, that's not the way we want to do things. Do you see what I'm talking about there? And sort of making it conversational, hearing their thoughts and input on it, trying to have a nice conversation around it, it probably connects to the core values in the organization. So I think if you do it that way, and you're also building in there, how you do believe in them, and you appreciate these other aspects, that it won't come off that way, but I'm sure it could be done in a way that it seems negative, but I think that would just be a key communication skill.
Yeah, I agree. I think those two stories you shared, they really remind me of, I love the book Blue Ocean Strategy, about, a different way of strategic planning, and particularly for it's not as, I think often it doesn't work as well in schools, but definitely for businesses that are, it's an interesting perspective on strategic planning. But one of the sections of the book that I find most helpful is where they talk about, how do you get buy-in from your wider group of stakeholders around new strategy, or, where you want to go, new ideas, etc. And they use the term, I don't know, apologies to listeners if you can, I do work from home, so you may hear a two-year-old having a ball in the background in another part of the house, but he's quite loud. So if you can hear that, he's just a joyous 2-year-old. But one thing that I love that they share is they talk about fair. They really talk about this word fair, and saying that, people, this one of the key things that will really break trust, that will stop buy-in, all these different things, is when people feel like something is unfair. And I think if you can make a process, whatever the process is, if you can make it truly fair, so that people say, you know what, that wasn't easy. Like you said, sometimes when you have to let someone go, or you just have a difficult pathway with someone that's working for you where you have to give them feedback a number of times and then they decide to leave. If that process is done in a way where everyone can look at it and say, you know what, it was not nice, but it was fair, I think
Yeah.
that is such a big that makes such a big difference.
Yeah. And it's funny. I've come to be more and more a believer in the human resource department and the things they recommend. It's like in my early days, it's like, oh gosh, they want you to dot all these I's and cross all these T's. They don't know what it's like in the real world. Um, but in time, you come to see that really just so many of what an HR department is looking for is really for you to be fair and clear and giving people a chance to, show if they could do something different. And when you walk all that out, you realize that, really I'm doing everything I can for this employee to give them the opportunity to succeed. And so, being clear, providing resources, additional training if they want, different kinds of support. So it's really the most loving thing we can do for them. But it just so happens to set you up in the very best place legally too, to show that you've done, you've been fair in that regard. And a really neat byproduct too, I will say, maybe that's not the right word, but for the ones that aren't going well, something that we see happen again and again is the person choosing to voluntarily resign and leave. They see that
Yeah.
you had this high standard that they realize isn't working for them, and so then they even voluntarily leave, which is nice for them and their future. One thing too, I'll say, on that is that I like even seeing sometimes is that we've had people who, were not succeeding as a teacher, and then they ended up going into a whole different profession. And I think that's a neat thing too, that we probably helped them realize this isn't the calling for you, and they went on to be an awesome youth pastor or an awesome real estate agent. But again, all by working on that process and not being slow about it, but giving people an appropriate chance to learn and do something different.
Yeah, I remember someone saying, I can't remember who it was, but they had this phrase, to make sure feedback is done, to make sure it's clear and early. And I really love that. Obviously, I love the word clear because my whole organization is called Clarity. I'm a big fan of clarity, but I think that's what I like about your approach. That idea of getting things out of your head is that it also it does create that. That's a great point you made earlier. That mistrust when someone goes, "Wait a second, you've been sitting on this for 5 months. How do I know when you're not sitting on something?" Like and it's so hard as a leader because there are so many things where you go, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to address that. There's those moments of wisdom around that. But I think your team, your people need to know that if you do have something that if you can give, and that's why I think that idea of specific, giving that specific feedback, making it as clear as possible, giving it to them as early as possible. The day something happens, the day after, it's much less likely, even if someone takes it the wrong way, it's much less likely to have all that toxic attachment of you always think I'm, it's kind of, it takes that whole, from both sides that, you look at the past year, you never blah, 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 it takes that out of it. And it makes it about this one specific thing that I'm giving you feedback on, which even if it goes negatively or the person takes it the wrong way, it's so much easier to come back from that rather than when you present this kind of snowball, 5 things from the past 6 months.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's been what I've seen, to where I've even had some of my leadership team articulate back to me that they, appreciate that they know where they stand with me because I'll even, talk about little things. And I've tried to have an environment of trust to where they feel like they can tell me things too. And there's actually today, my director of advancement, she shared with me, she said, "Hey, would you mind if I give you some constructive feedback?" And I was like, "Sure, go for it." And she had some really good feedback about a meeting that we had the day before with a couple. And after she shared it, I was like, gosh, you are totally right. You know, I'm really going to try to do better on that next time, so to where, somebody who reports to me can also feel the freedom to, give me some feedback. Because otherwise, if she didn't feel that freedom, I might keep making that same mistake again. But instead, she did. And I don't think I'll make that same mistake again, after having her help me to see it.
Yeah, I 100%. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in being in a role like yours. I think that when you start out, whether it's an assistant principal or whether someone is a teacher, you're going to get feedback. You'll often get it from all directions. And that's got its negative things, but there's also something really positive about that, because you can learn from that. And the challenge about rising higher in an organization is that, particularly when you get to the role of CEO or head of school or president, the more power you have in an organization, the more power you have about whose voices are allowed, you hear. And I see this, and it's such a hard thing, because there's that self-preservation in us to actually not want rejection, to want to belong. And so I think it's so easy to be the leader, and without even doing it intentionally, to not enable and empower those voices. I think it has to be done really intentionally. Otherwise, people are naturally going to go, well, I don't want to give constructive feedback to my boss because I don't want to damage the relationship. And so it's just not going to happen organically. It has to be something you build intentionally. How have you built that? Like if we've got a leader listening who's either, maybe they want to one day step into a role, in a role like yours, how do you build that trust so that your team do know they can tell you what they really think and give you constructive feedback?
Yeah, no, good question. I think, being transparent, to where you let them know the mistakes that you make, and you're willing to say, well, guys, I blew it there. I should have done this, so they see that you're willing to, be, again, transparent, and recognizing that you make mistakes, and you don't mind even talking about that with others, and inviting it, say, hey, I mean, in that meeting, if there's anything that I could have done better, or any better way I could be serving you, so asking for it in different ways. And obviously, when you get it, not, attacking them for it, but rather thanking them for it and helping them see that you really are, considering their words, and not that you're going to agree with every single thing they say, but usually, when they've had something to challenge me on, very often they are correct. So in most cases, I'm able to thank them for it, and let them feel safe and comfortable, and not worried that I'm going to, be upset or hold some kind of grudge about it. But instead, I actually want to get better. The verse I think about, the Bible says, the wise man loves a rebuke, and I think that's the way we want to be, is that, hey, if I am mistaken on something, you are helping me if you open my eyes to that, so please.
Yeah.
And I know I probably am mistaken on various things, or could do certain things better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great advice. I want to ask you about mentors along the way. I know there's always a lot of people that have been significant in the journey, but who comes to mind as someone who's been really pivotal in mentoring you or shaping you as a leader?
Yeah, good question. Probably the name that first comes to mind is Mark Davis, and he was the executive pastor of the church, and he's actually the one who really started the school, from scratch, and was the person who hired me on staff, and just a really godly and wise leader, just really smart business sense, wise spiritually, really seemed to care for people and want to do what was going to further God's kingdom, and what was going to be the best blessing for people, and just super sharp, super intelligent, and an incredibly hard worker, to the point that I'll say I don't try to emulate his level of work ethic. I think I have a very high work ethic and work very hard. He takes it to another level that I think might get my life out of balance if I did that. So he does play. So he does play hard too, and that's probably where he finds some of his balance. But yeah, that's probably the name that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm asking you this off the top of your head, but any stories that come to mind that you can share, or any advice he's given you, or specifically, or anything that comes to mind where you think, yeah, that's just a great example of Mark, just where you watched and went, wow, that's really great leadership.
Uh, this might sound like a silly one. I'll share two different stories. But one silly little one when I was first starting, and so I had no administrative sense, hardly at all. I've been really a teacher in the classroom, just dealing with my, one class at a time. I remember coming to him and we had made, 1,000 copies of this document that we were going to be getting out to parents about the school or something. And there was something on it that wasn't ideal. And I said to him, I said, well, we've already made all the copies, right? So we could probably just roll with that. And he was like, no, we want to get this right. Throw it all in the trash. And so just that importance of, communication being excellent, and it's worth, wasting some papers and copies or whatever it is to get it right. Doing things at an excellent level was one thing that he was very good about. And then just relationally, he would, as I talk about the play hard idea, he had a boat, and so he would take people out in the boat, but he would sometimes take like the school leadership team out in the boat for an all day of some deep sea fishing or something, or even a trip where we did it for several days. And I think he just recognized that getting away in a different setting, with the team, could really just create deeper bonds and help us have greater connection than just the normal day to day, in the office such. So, you'd see him, proactively making some things like that happen.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see a lot of leaders underestimate. There is, so much of the relationships with our teams, and I see this a lot in schools. I was just chatting with someone yesterday about it, actually, with a school principal, about this idea that I think one of the big advantages in schools is the that attracts teachers, and can be the hours that you're in class, you're at school. And what I was chatting about with this school principal was about how, it can also create this expectation where people think I'm just here from, say in Australia, I don't know what the hours are there, but I'm just here from 9 to 3, and that's the expectation of my role, and then I do all my work at other times. I just mentioned that because I think in schools in particular, it can create this this expectation, if you're not careful, that starts as a positive, because it's like, well, actually, that there are some great positives of that compared to other work cultures where it's a 7 to 7, or so there is a healthy element to it. But what you find is that sometimes when you want to do something like that, in terms of whatever team you're leading, doing something outside of hours and getting away together, whether it's a leadership team, or even with some of your, for someone who's in a head of year level or head of department role in a school, I think we underestimate how helpful it can be to get away from the day to day and spend time together. And it sounds so simple, but there is something, just even just having people over and sitting around and eating dinner together, or getting families together, those things, it's harder to connect the dots between that and then the results we're seeing in our school. But I think what it does is, when those relationships and you have those connections, like going out on a boat together, and you have those conversations, it means that when there are hard moments, or there are difficult, you've got that relationship together that helps you get through those hard times. So I love that he did that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. We actually just sent several of our principals from a couple of the campuses to a training together, in a different state, in a nice setting for several days, and they just so appreciated that time together. in the same way, we sent about 8 Bible teachers to a conference together. And again, same thing, just so appreciate the bonding time and the chance to learn together, but also all the downtime together has a real value in creating relationship and trust. And, I learn things about you that I might not learn just during the busyness of the normal school day.
Yeah, 100%. And I think from a leadership perspective, that obviously takes. Once again, this is a thing that I hear a lot from heads of schools is those kind of trips that they're not automatic placements in a budget. You really
Right.
got to be intentional about making space for those kind of things to happen. And if someone steps into a role and they think, oh, that'd be nice, we'll see what happens, it won't. You have to be intentional about saying, no, I want to invest in my people having some downtime together, and also that feeling of actually they care enough about me to send me somewhere to get that professional development and that personal development.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, as we move towards wrapping up, I've got some Leadership Express questions to ask. I finish these. I finish every podcast by asking some of these as a bit of a lightning round. So, you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one, I got this off Tim Ferriss, who has a really popular podcast. What book, if you think back over, your life, particularly as a leader, but it could be outside of that, what book have you gifted the most to others, do you think?
There's 2 that might be a tie, so I'll do both of them if I could. So one is Getting Things Done by David Allen. You familiar with that one? Yeah. So
I am. Yeah.
I just love what he's done there, and I've sort of built my, days and time around that way of capturing everything that really frees your mind up in a big way. Can I tell a brief story about that?
Yeah, please go.
It might mess up lightning round, but so yeah, I just remember before I read that book that I would have so many things on my mind because I didn't have systems to sort of get them in place to know that they would get done. So your subconscious just keeps struggling with it, or your conscious does. And I remember sitting in a meeting where the team was trying to think of some new ways we could do, these things for kids or whatever. And I remember just thinking in my head, I don't want to think of a single new thing because I am up to here with all the things I'm currently carrying, But as I dug into his system, it really got to the place where I was able to get things off my mind because they were into a reliable system that I knew I would get to. And that just really, I feel like, took my creativity to a whole new level because I wasn't carrying all these tasks, trying to remember this, that, and the other thing, but instead had some good tight systems for it. So that's one. The other book that's a good tie, I'm not sure which one wins, is Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard, which is just a great one for, how can we change and really grow into the people God wants us to be. I feel like it's one of the best descriptions of that.
Yeah, 2 great books. I'm not familiar with Renovation of the Heart, so I'll have to check that one out. I'm familiar with Dallas Willard, but great suggestion. I'm a big fan of the GTD, Getting Things Done framework, and I've also used it. I particularly love the weekly, what does he call it in the
weekly review?
The weekly review. Yeah, it's a great system, and like you said, it's his also the way he unpacks how things get stored in our head that I think is quite a eye-opening thought for a lot of people. So yeah, great book. What about for you? Any right now, are there any podcasts you're listening to, any books that you're reading, any blogs, and anything that you're just really enjoying content wise out there at the moment?
Well, let's see. I'm a big Audible book guy just because then I can be at the gym or, doing yard work, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So I'm currently doing Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And so far I'm enjoying that. That's been a good one. And I've been doing some books also on executive coaching. And as I've been coaching a few people. And so just trying to, sharpen my, skills in that, which is also something good for, you can just even do with your direct reports as well, as you try to lead them to be able
Mm.
to, figure out things for themselves and become less and less dependent on you and more where they're, figuring out how to solve their own problems.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Do you have any favorite questions that you ask? You're sitting in a one-on-one with a team member, you're sitting with parents, prospective parents for one of the schools, you're, sitting with your leadership team. Are there any questions where you think, oh yeah, that's probably a question that I throw in the mix quite a lot?
Probably one of the ones I ask the most is something along the lines of, you know, is there a way we could be serving you better? And that goes for employees as well as for the parents and students. Is there some way that we could be making the school experience better for you, or your work experience better for you? And in so many cases, the answer is no. But I think even then, they appreciate that you cared enough to ask. Or when they do have, an answer, then hey, here's, now I can see, is this something that I can do for the person? And in a lot of cases, it is. There is a way to help.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. On a lighter note, what about a movie or TV show that really impacted you? Anything that it can be something that was really profound, or it can just be a kind of nostalgic, part of your childhood, or anything that comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, a couple of favorites. Um, Although, do you know what VidAngel is? Where you can like clean up your movies. It lets you take out any bad parts. So you might need a VidAngel. This one a little bit, but the movie Meet Joe Black, I just feel like there's so much good things going on in that movie. And another movie that a lot of people haven't heard of is called The Judge, which is a real good one. I'd recommend.
Is that the Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
one? Yeah. Okay, I haven't actually seen that. I'll have to watch The Judge.
check it
And
out.
last,
My family hates it, but I love it. So
it's like for me. I really enjoyed when I was growing up. I really enjoyed Groundhog Day.
uh-huh.
And I remember when I got all my friends together one time, and I was like, "You guys, we've got to watch this amazing movie." But it's funny how sometimes something you watch when you're little, you watch it again when you're older. Or I wasn't that little when I watched it, but anyway, I remember we were watching Groundhog Day, and all of us but one mate of mine fell asleep, and I went, oh, "Okay, maybe that was just
I
me who
love
really
Groundhog Day.
liked that."
Groundhog Day is great.
Yeah, well, that's good. Okay,
And that's
last
really,
question.
I'll just say this real quick. That's one
Yeah.
thing my wife has noted, and I have too. That I really like the movies where there's a guy who's a scoundrel who later becomes something better. So
Yes.
Groundhog Day, you see that. The Judge, you see that. Meet Joe Black, you see that. Family Man, you see that. There's so many movies where that's the trajectory, and to me, that's real satisfying.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because there's so many movies and TV shows out there at the moment where I think it's kind of the reverse of that. It's really fascinating. There's kind of this anti-hero where
Yeah,
you watch a good person who makes the wrong decisions and their life kind of falls apart, which is uh, I think is nowhere near as satisfying from oh wow, that was such an uplifting movie or TV show. But I find that narrative where you feel like you're watching a TV show where someone has so much potential, and maybe they start out really great, but they start making wrong decision after wrong decision. That's become an interesting genre.
yeah, yeah. And again, cut me off if you need to, but similarly in art, it's like it had. Hopefully, this will change in time, but oftentimes, if you are creating a piece that's really, beautiful and that might bring joy, you think some Renaissance paintings or different things like that. Um, Today, that's almost seen as like, not serious. That the serious art is where it's darker, and it's got these darker themes and such. And I think children's literature too. If you look at the children's books that will win the awards, oftentimes like the parent's an alcoholic or the kid this or that, And I think people see that as like, oh wow, they were willing to go deeper, than
Mm.
these other lighter books. And it's like, well, not necessarily. They just were willing to deal with darker themes or non-redemptive themes, and it's not harder to do. And I don't think it makes for great art or literature or movies.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I'm with a 2-year-old. The reading so many books together, and there is great. There's obviously beautiful books that have really positive themes, but then it's also just I think I really enjoy the fun. Silly books that are really light, such as, I don't know if this is popular in the US, it might be an Australia thing, but there's a really famous book that's been around for decades called "There's a Hippopotamus on My Roof Eating Cake."
I don't know
Have
that
you ever come across that one?
one. No.
there's an obscure there's an obscure recommendation from a leadership podcast for anyone
Yeah,
listening,
yeah.
but that is a big part of my current library right now, is reading books to a 2-year-old. And that is a great book. There's a Hippopotamus on My Roof Eating Cake. It's about this little girl who sees her whole life, everything that's happening, and when people are coming to fix the roof, or she sees it all through the lens of her imaginary friend who's a hippopotamus on the roof, who's eating cake and doing all the things that, yeah, it's a really great book.
That's fine. I'll check it out.
And a lot of fun. Definitely not dark. Um, okay, last question as we land. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
One piece of leadership advice to a young leader. Um, I would say uh, find a wise, godly person who's willing to uh, coach you and bring you under their wing, because then maybe through that one piece they could find everything.
Yeah, that is great advice. And once again, as so much of what we've talked about today, I think that it's easy for a young leader to think, "Oh, yeah, but that just happens." But it is, it's actually one of the. I'm writing a book at the moment about. The title is "Replace Yourself," and it's going to be about how to transform schools without overwhelming staff through this system where you replace yourself. But one of the key principles in the book is the power of the ask, and it really is, we underestimate. And so for those listening, they might have had someone pop into their head where they think, I know this person through my family, or I know this person on the board of that other, but I'd never ask them because they wouldn't be interested in helping me. But I think it's people often appreciate, particularly really, like you said, really wise, really successful people. They're not actually getting asked that often by young leaders to invest in them. And I think it can be really worth thinking about outside the box. Who is it around me that I wouldn't necessarily think naturally to go and seek a coffee out or lunch with them to ask them. But if you do, in my life anyway, I've found so often people say, you know what, I would love to do that. So I love that advice, and for people to think outside the box and seek someone out who might be a little bit, I don't know if they'd say yes, someone that you really respect, or can be a great start to a mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Great advice. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. I've had so much fun hearing about. It's funny with these leadership conversations. You think it'll be some big leadership takeaway, but I can't help but just laugh at the story that you shared, Jason, around the when you were a youth pastor organizing the whole event and then realizing you hadn't booked the location. That's just so endearing, because I think there'd be so many people listening and going, yep, I've had my realized I hadn't booked the location moment in whatever context. So just wonderful content. But most of all, I want to thank you for coming on, Jason, and sharing vulnerably, and sharing a bit of your life and your story, and so many great nuggets of wisdom in here. And also, it's just been, I've just had a great time as well. So thank you so much for coming on the Leadership Conversations podcast.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Honored to be asked, and fun conversation. You had a lot of good questions.